them both for a long, long time, and have had many, many debates with each of them, especially one of them, named Marc Andreessen, for a long time now. So let's bring them out. Marc Andreessen and Reid Hoffman. Either one, yeah. Sit there.
Hey.
Oh, hello.
Hey.
So, Marc Andreessen has this habit of texting me really rude things almost continually. And while I was sitting backstage within 10 feet of him, he was tweeting at me about that last talk. So I think it's very important because I think Facebook is sucking the life out of us. So what do you think?
That's the opening question.
Yeah.
Outstanding. So, as a sitting Facebook director, I politely declined to answer. But let me generalize out. So this is something the one hears about the internet. A variation on this. The one hears about the internet a lot. So let me start by saying that gentleman, I'm sure he's doing fantastic work, and he clearly means well. I really, really deeply disagree with everything he just said, and the reason is because, not just because I had some role in creating the whole thing, but a friend of mine named Bo Cronin, who works in VR and is an advanced thinker on these things, has a term he uses called reality privilege. Mm-hmm. And so it's the view from the box seats. It's the view from it's a view from places in the world. That's exactly the kind of view you get from places in the world in which there are super rich real world experiences to have, mm-hmm. right? And so you grow up in an upper middle class community, probably on the coast. You have these incredible schools. You have these incredible enriched activities. You have all these after school activities you should do. You've got all these incredible people to talk to. You go to a college campus. You get to hang out with all these incredible super geniuses. For the 0.0001% of the population of the world who gets to do all those things, then this internet thing is a big step down. For everybody else, the internet is a giant step up, mm-hmm. right? Most people don't have that level of reality privilege. Like most people grow up in places where there's a much higher level of what you might call intellectual deprivation. There's just not that many people around to talk to. There's just not that many interesting things being discussed. There's not that many great experiences to have. It's hard to learn new things. The schools aren't good. I mean, most kids in the world don't even go to school, or go to school up to the grade 4, grade 6, or grade 8. It just can't progress beyond that point because there's nothing locally. There's just no local system infrastructure or community to be able to engage on ideas. And so the internet represents a giant level up on all those topics for most of the world. And I think it's a fantastic thing.
All right. Okay. Well then, fine. Snapchat for everybody. So, Reid, would you like to?
Look, I think that it's correct that there's various forms of kind of, call it commercial system biases that come out, which is companies try to say, look, we want to occupy a bunch of your time, so we try to figure out how to have that time be occupied. And this is the similar true. This ranges everything from the agriculture industry, which says, well, eat more sugar. Like, you have these commercial biases the whole way through, mm-hmm. and we adjust to them. Now, that being said, the overall system is better, and we can tune it, mm-hmm. right? And so I think that one of the other things frequently is not realizing there's things you can do to change for more of the kind of the good and the bad in these things. And obviously, I am less focused at the moment on questions around autoplay, mm-hmm. or kind of equivalent, and I'm more focused on questions about like how do we get to discernment of truth, and how do we get truth in media, and mm-hmm. what is this whole fake news and all facts and all that kind of stuff. And that is, I think, a much more deep issue that I'm focused on at the moment.
Well, I think one of the reasons I wanted to have these two was, one, because you make investments, you change companies, you make a lot of decisions that impact other people. Two, you're super argumentative and debating about where that's going, where it happened. And I wanted people to get a sense from both of you of where innovation's going, how it's going, because you're not in charge of it, but very influential to the process, both of you, in different ways. So let's start on that idea that you just talked about, which brings in all of social media. I'm not going to just pull out Facebook, but all of social media. The idea, it's something I've been railing on recently for some reason, is the responsibility, the social responsibility, the civil responsibility of social media companies and other companies in Silicon Valley to stop pretending these platforms are benign. So as someone who's created these platforms, each of you has done your part, how do you look at them now? Because I think they've morphed in ways. Some people think social media has become weaponized. Some people think other things. But Mark Zuckerberg's been talking about this a lot, the idea of the responsibility. So how do you look at where we are right now for Silicon Valley? Why don't we start with you, Mark, or Reid? How do you look? Okay, Reid.
I'm happy to start.
Okay.
Look, so I think that the question is that we had presumed that broad brush, that most people could kind of make assertion of truth within their kind of normal set. And I think actually, in fact, it is somewhat hackable. It's filter bubbles is one of the things that people talk about a lot in the Valley, and kind of how do you make sure that you're not blinded by it and you have communications that go across that. There's questions about assertion of, what is the most relevant fact, or I don't think there is any such thing as an alternative fact. I think that's George Orwell and Aldous Huxley speak. But I think that the question is, okay, how do we help people figure out better guideposts to the truth? Because simply being as part of the feed on the screen sometimes is treated as too much of, oh, that must be true. And so what I think is good is I think the whole industry, and I've been part of a number of conversations about, okay, what are the right ways to do that? And part of the reason why they try to say it's more platform, I don't know if it's trying to say it's benign, is they're trying to say we're not trying to impose a point of view, we're trying to help you get to truth. Or it's kind of classic, like what is the algorithm part of it? And so I think that there's a lot of thinking now about like what are the different ways we can do that. One of the things that I think is important is perhaps building that out of the kinds of things we trust. Like we trust other people, and can we get to some kind of version of, okay, I know this kind of information is much more contentious. There's a lot of people who disagree with it. This kind of information is something that I can rely upon more. And I think we need to get to that kind of scoring system, and I think we need to make it simple enough that it helps unify discourse across the country.
How do you look at this?
So I think truth has become shorthand for things that people on the coasts believe.
Okay. Right.
And fake news or false, whatever, alternative facts has become shorthand for people, the things that people in the center of the country believe. I think this whole topic has gone completely off base somehow in the wake of the election. So if you read the Coastal Press, which did a generally spectacular job, I think, of covering the election last year, but if you just read the press in aggregate, read all the stories, the overwhelming thing that you were carried away with was there is no way on earth that Donald Trump can win this election. Right? It's impossible. You had the fantastic editor of the New York Times up here on stage today. They had the day of the election, they had Hillary that morning at 92% odds of winning the election.
Right, I saw the ticker.
92% odds. So it actually turned out if you actually wanted last year in 2016 to read the story of the election and actually get the truth, you read Breitbart. Now, nobody wants to hear that because we all have concluded that Breitbart is absurd right-wing propaganda and that somehow the coastal press is somehow the truth. But it just demonstrably last year that was not true. So I just think we all just need to take a step back on this idea that there's absolute truth and that somehow we have some sort of monopoly or preferential access to it, and the rest of these people kind of don't understand anything. By the way, it's a surefire way to lose elections.
Because
if Democrats are ever going to lose elections, or ever going to win elections again in the center of the country and the south of the country, they have to show up with some message other than you're all a bunch of morons.
And we get that.
That's not going to work.
But that's not the point. The point is, are these, you can still...
Well, that is the message.
Yes, but I think...
That's what's being heard.
Yes, but that's an easy shorthand way of saying, no matter what they say on the left, either coast is untrue. You can say untruths to people and get them to vote a certain way. I mean, it's very, that.
If you like your healthcare plan, you can keep it.
Right.
Right. Obama, 200008. Right.
Yes.
Obamacare. How's that?
Yes.
How's that working?
No, I get that.
I'm going to close Guantanamo in my first year in office.
You don't.
Right. For some reason.
Well, the fact that politicians break promises to us is not a very big.
If you read the press coverage of those promises at the time, they were presented as truth. They were presented as, yes, these are absolutely things that are going to happen. There were reams of coverage around Obamacare of how well it was going to work.
All right. Getting from the news coverage, what is the responsibility of these platforms? Do they have any? Because Dean would say no. He said no. They're just there as platforms. He thought the New York Times had a responsibility. They necessarily don't. Do you imagine all these technology platforms have any social responsibility? Mark has been talking about it a lot. He's been visiting lots of the country. He's been petting livestock quite a bit. which is nice.
Do you know how fluffy cows are?
They are, apparently.
Cows are super fluffy.
I have been around many cows. I am aware of cows. But how do you look at that responsibility? Because everyone seems to be visiting them doing that kind of thing. They are in Silicon Valley. How do you look at is there a social responsibility for this technology now?
They're all going where I grew up.
I know.
Most amazing thing I've ever seen.
And you left and aren't going back.
So I'm going to frustrate. I'm just not going to. I can't talk. I'm sitting director of Facebook. I need to let Facebook talk about this.
Right, not Facebook, but just in general, like as technology evolves, do you think that Silicon Valley needs to have more of a social conscience?
Oh, so I think it's definitely a good idea for businesses to have social conscience. But again, this is where I would say I believe there is much more of it's become very trendy to claim that Silicon Valley doesn't have a social conscience, and it's just the default assumption is that all these companies are doing horrible things all the time, and I just don't think it's true.
Okay, all right.
So I don't think the situation is anywhere near as polarized as people are presenting it.
Well, people like to.
But by the way, Silicon Valley, just if I could for a second, Silicon Valley, like people need to bear in mind.
You could, and you will.
So 2 years ago, the conventional wisdom right around or much of the rest of the country, and that you read, actually, frankly, in a lot of the press coverage of Silicon Valley was, it's this hotbed of like these crazy libertarians, like it's these crazy extreme outlier, like fringe elements. And of course, our friend Peter was always kind of held up as
Your friend Peter.
the good friend Peter.
You're a good friend.
Very good friend Peter, actually, was held up as kind of representative of the Valley. Right. A funny thing happened last year, which was it turns out that was fake news. It turns out that was not true. In fact, it turns out the opposite is true, which is the 99.999% of Silicon Valley last year voted for Hillary Clinton, supported Hillary Clinton, donated to Hillary Clinton. Like it was like the money difference. I don't know. It was like some giant multiple money difference, basically, because nobody gave to Trump. And so the Valley not only believes it has.
Oh, by the way, may I point out you tweeted I'm with her, correct?
That is true.
Right, okay.
I will concede to that.
All right.
I subsequently deleted.
I
subsequently deleted all my tweets, including that one.
Okay,
But
I
will cop to that.
All right.
So
Silicon Valley, I
think Silicon Valley not only has a real sense of social responsibility. If anything, Silicon Valley is all the way over on the other side. Silicon Valley is extremely left-wing, extremely liberal. And I actually think this has become part of the problem. I think it's now you have the other version of the problem, which is actually, I think it's really hard for a lot of people in Silicon Valley to even articulate the other side at this point. I think it's hard to even articulate the case for voting for Donald Trump. I think it's hard to articulate what people in the Midwest and the South were thinking. And I think this polarization thing, it's the general problem that I was talking about earlier. But I think the Valley is part of the coast polarizing from the center of the country to a much greater extreme than we've ever seen in our lifetimes.
All right, now.
And this does not. I mean, left unchecked, this does not head to good places.
Okay, this is great because you didn't want to talk about politics at all, but great. Okay, so you have been very active.
Yes.
In that left-wing cabal, apparently. But
that's the way we
It's not a
talk about
cabal.
it.
It's like nearly everybody.
No, it's a cabal. So talk about what you're doing, because I think people are looking to you. Everyone says we've got to get Reid as the leader of this movement.
No.
Yes, but they do.
I do.
I do. Yeah.
No.
So talk about what you're doing precisely with Mark Pincus and others.
Yeah, so Mark, who's here in the audience, he and I started talking years ago about how do you essentially try to create consumer internet technologies to help shape a kind of pro-business and also pro kind of social values future, and how do you put that together into a movement? Because I actually think part of the whole thing is to get the bridge building to make the right thing, and I think part of the social responsibility for these growing strength of tech platforms is to make that happen. So I think there is responsibility. I think it's a growing sense of it, and I think people are trying to figure out what it means and how to operationalize it the right way. And then personally, it's everything from obviously part of the question that led to the election of Donald Trump is there's a lot of people in a number of states that are feeling in pain. They worry that their children have less good futures than they had. There is, kind of serious opioid epidemics in a number of different states and regions. And they say, look, these need to be fixed. Don't tell us more of the same. Tell us how we have opportunity. Tell us how we make that happen. And I think, part of the thing about being inventive, being problem solvers, because that's part of what we try to do with technology and businesses and so forth, is we should do more of that. Now, I think another part of it is the earlier thing is I do think we have a problem. I think the fake news thing is actually leveled both ways. Like, I don't think it's the coast saying the Midwest. I mean, you've got the president saying CNN is fake news, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you have the erosion of these kinds of institutions, and we have to be able to talk, right? If you can't have some basis for conversation which says, okay, this is what we think truth is, this is where we think we should be going, it's very difficult for a democracy to work. So, it's everything from the kind of win the future
This is this organization.
Yes, that
WTF.
WTF
Right.
with a deliberate, kind of under.
I see what you're doing.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I find it juvenile, but go right ahead.
Oh, well, we specialize in juvenile.
I know that.
Yes,
Oh, believe me, after many years
Yes,
of covering
yes.
all of you, I get that.
And so, matter of fact, actually, one of my most favored theories of the evolution of humanity is neoteny. Right? We were born early, and that plasticity and ability to learn is key. So I think there's a whole stack of things, and I think some of it is like, what does the future work look like? I think some of it is the question of how do we get communications channel? How do we get to a rebuild of some kind of communication? Like one of the projects that I funded at the MIT Media Labs called Cortico, which has done an analysis through the Twitter fire hose of how fragmented the discourse is. Well, how do we get that discourse somewhat less fragmented? Because with that, with fragmented discourse, of course you end up with kind of complete, like, different planets. And
No,
that's not
it's
good
a
for-
hellscape out there, but go ahead. Yeah.
So anyway, and then there's a whole question about how these things get hacked by, autocratic, hostile actors.
Right.
And, one of the things that we have to pay attention to is it is not necessarily purely just the diversity of humanity that's playing on it, but there are people who have political aims that may be investing. And, I'm really interested to see what will emerge out of, kind of Russian and foreign power influence on trying to hack social media, because that's kind of a key issue. And I think actually one of the things that Brad Smith at Microsoft called for that I think is really interesting is how do we get to a Geneva Convention in cyber? I think that's actually an important thing to look at happening, because part of that is, well, what's going to happen with these things being hackable? A little bit like the talk just before us, your attention can be hacked in ways that it isn't just code hacking, it isn't just cyber, but it's kind of a question of what do you presume to be true? Right. And you want a vibrant democracy, we have to try to get to a point where we're having rational conversations and we're actually using evidence and argumentation to decide X is true and Y is not.
Right. All right. I want to get to where innovation's going, because I think that's really and what investments is. But are you investing a lot of your money in this? I'm not supposed to call you a certain thing of the left, but what are you investing a lot of money? Do you want to run for office?
Definitely not run for office.
Why?
Look, I prefer the partnering, board member, investing. That's one of the reasons I didn't
guy
say
behind
I
the
didn't
guy
say
behind
CEO of LinkedIn for
the
that
smoking
reason.
man.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, role model for all those who didn't get the X-Files reference.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm investing a bunch of money. I'm trying to actually facilitate conversations, trying to facilitate what the right kinds of ideas are. Like, what are the ways that we can make sure that we have vibrant economic ecosystems and middle-class jobs across the country.
How much money?
Ultimately, a lot. I'd say thus far is probably millions.
Millions, but hundreds of millions, you think this is?
It could get there.
Could get there. All right, so let's talk about where, and Mark, you're not running for office, I hope.
No.
Okay, good, okay. I would not advise it.
Can you imagine anybody voting for me?
I'd vote for you.
I might just as a joke.
Is that right?
They got two.
If I run, I'll take the sarcastic votes. I'm fine with that.
All right, so let's talk about innovation, where it's going. You guys have been around forever. There's been a lot of different investments and periods of time and things like that. And it is related to jobs, the future of jobs. Let's start with there. How do you look? Because I think, to me, it seems like Silicon Valley is doing a lot more serious thought about investing beyond into the next era. Cars, automation, robotics. Each of you, why don't you start, Mark, talk about what you think are the most, last time you were here, you were talking about software eating the world, you talked about a wide range of things. How are you thinking now about investments?
Yeah, so it's interesting. We have two sectors, two different kinds of economy in the U.S., or two different kind of categories of sectors. Divide them into what I might call the fast sectors and the slow sectors, or the fast change sectors, slow change sectors. So the fast change sectors are sectors like retail, transportation, media, in which technology has had a huge impact. Software is eating those sectors. There's massive change happening in those sectors, massive productivity improvements as measured by productivity, which is how economists measure the rate of technological change. And by the way, gigantic churn in jobs, right? Mm-hmm. So huge churn in obviously media and retail.
And you're in BuzzFeed, you're in a bunch of things.
Yeah, exactly, right. And and lots of debates about the nature of that churn. By the way, however, along with that, rapidly falling prices, right? So the prices of basically everything in, Amazon, if the experience everybody has as an Amazon customer, prices in retail, prices in media with all the free media and the internet, and prices in transportation are going to fall, dramatically with self-driving cars. And so very rapidly falling prices, but like a big concern of where the job's going to come from. So that's part of the economy. The other part of the economy is what you might call the slow change part of the economy, which is all the sectors in which the opposite of that is happening. And so these are sectors like healthcare, education, construction, elder care, child care, and also, by the way, government. So to call those kind of the big six. In those sectors, the opposite is happening, which is in those sectors we have a price crisis, right? The price of all those things is rising super fast, right? So the FT had a story today. 88% of all of the price inflation in the U.S. economy since 1990 is attributable entirely, 88% of it attributable to healthcare, education, and construction, right? And so what's happening on the sort of the slow change sector of the economy is basically everything's becoming super expensive. And if you try to buy a house, or if you want to send a kid to school, or if you need to get care for an ailing relative, you experience this, and hence all the concern around the cost of all these things. Those are the sectors of the economy that technology is having almost no impact on, right? Software is playing a very small role at best. Those are also the sectors that have almost no productivity growth, right, as measured by economists. And left unchecked, those sectors are basically just going to eat the economy, right? If the products and services in those sectors keep rising in price, they end up being everything we pay for.
So healthcare is eating the economy.
Yeah, healthcare, education, and construction are the big three, and they're just eating the economy. Fully loaded construction costs have doubled since the year 2000 in the U.S. I mean, just like absurd things are happening in real estate and construction. And so I think the opportunity and the challenge is for the tech industry in Silicon Valley and all of us to go figure out how to have a much bigger impact in the slow growth sectors of the economy, the slow change sectors of the economy. I think if we do that, if we're effective at it, we have the opportunity to bend the cost curves over time. And these, by the way, are very, very big sectors with very, very big kind of entrenched forces at play. By the way, the slow change sectors also happen to be highly regulated, right? These are sectors of the economy where the government plays a gigantic role in the economics of these sectors. And so these are not easy sectors to disrupt, right? This is the big leagues. But the opportunity exists to really go after the price curves and systematically drive down prices in those industries. If we do that, that may be the single biggest thing we could do to improve quality of life for ordinary people. We are actively investing. So super actively investing, education, Udacity, one of our companies, going directly after skills acquisition, doing very well with an entirely new way to link with employers to do skills acquisition and training online. We're very aggressively investing in healthcare. We think there's a whole new, very interesting thing happening at the intersection of healthcare and software that's just getting started, and we're investing very aggressively in that. Construction's harder. The big challenge that we're all going to have to tackle in the long run is this sort of question of cities and this question of land use and whether cities are going to be allowed to get big enough where everybody who wants to get to them is going to be able to get to them. Mayor Swisher in San Francisco, I think, is going to have this on the top of her list as things to solve.
Absolutely.
So that's the sector. That's the sector.
You're going to be my deputy of something.
I am looking forward to it. Yes. I will take that on my business card. So that's a big one. We're also, by the way, elder care and child care are both increasingly central elements to the economy, huge employers in both fast-rising sectors. We have a company, Honor, that I'm involved in that's trying to come up with a fundamentally better way to orchestrate the whole process of elder care.
Reid, what about you?
So slightly different division. So I think about things that are kind of classic for what we do, which is kind of businesses with network effects, which can include both consumer and enterprise sides. So those are things like, obviously Airbnb or Convoy, which is kind of Uber for trucking. We just recently.
Do we still use that Uber for, or is that not allowed right now?
Well, I think we always use the version of Airbnb for whatever.
Yeah.
It's a quick.
I just did that for Mark, Mr. Lyft.
No, Uber for X is better now because it has an extra element of danger.
Okay. The Lyft guy. I let you have that one. Go ahead.
And so there's a stack of those sort of businesses, which I think I think we will continually design new forms of software ecosystems that have these network effects that organize how millions to billions of people communicate, work, coordinate, communicate, all that sort of thing together. And then part of what we look for is what are things that are substantively contrarian that are not in the kind of the current, kind of buzz cycle, right? The buzz cycle, today is AI, AR, VR, et cetera. And then what are the things that there you can actually do something that actually might be really interesting. And some of those will play out into those industries. So, if you figure out different kinds of construction, robotics, or you figure out, energy sources or other kinds of things, those can actually play into those and can actually change those cost curves. So it's a different way of looking at it, which is kind of through the lens of these things are defining kind of network effect software ecosystems with people and devices, kind of combined together. And then these things are what's kind of off the current beaten path.
So what is that? What do you name something?
So let's see, what can I name? One of the things that we did last year is a energy company, which I can't talk about in depth.
All right. What kind of energy?
Possibly fusion.
Possibly fusion.
Yes.
Okay. Oh God. God. And investing in that in a new and exciting way.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. What about robotics?
So I think robotics is, generally speaking, one of the areas that everyone knows is going to be super important, everything from autonomous vehicles to other kinds of things. So there's just a ton of them. Like the number of autonomous vehicles startups is
they're everywhere.
Yes, is like
Crazy.
an uncountable set. But it's clearly going to be there. And then robotics are going to be, like, for example, when you started saying construction, I was like, oh, robotics is the interesting, angle, is the first reflex there. And I think there's going to be a bunch of things there, some of which you'll see from the big companies. I think some of which you'll see from startups.
What do you think robotics? Because Bill Gates was just saying we should tax robots. Is that right? And then Marc Cuban is saying we've got to get into it because China is going to do this first.
We should. It's horrible and evil, but we have to be really good at it. Yeah, so there's a little bit of a paradox in there. So we should definitely tax robots right after we get done taxing PCs.
Okay, all right.
Which took away all the secretary jobs.
All right, okay.
So I propose we do it in that order.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So far, how do you look
So far, Microsoft hasn't taken us up on that.
All right. How do you get to, what do you imagine robotics is going?
Oh, it's very
It is a we'll get to the job issue in a second, but
Yeah.
but talk about the sectors, automation and robotics together, and I suppose AI also gets in that pot.
Yeah. So look. So the big thing is happening is the so-called AI, but machine learning. The whole sort of family of technologies around machine learning and sensors. Right. Something dramatic has really happened. Something dramatic really tipped about 5 years ago, where a whole category of things that just didn't work at one point all of a sudden work. Mm-hmm. And so I think at this point there's just a feeding frenzy in the tech industry and in the Valley to try to experiment with every single possible permutation of what can be done with AI and robots at every possible shape, size, and description. I think it's spectacular. It's one of the biggest booms / kind of exploratory. Let's go map the landscape and let's go try all the ideas that I think I've ever seen.
And what do you?
And we're actively investing.
What do you like about that? What do you worry in that area? When you say if everyone's pursuing it, just
it's a classic. It's the Silicon Valley. It's the thing that gets everybody excited about Silicon Valley, and then it's the thing everybody always criticizes Silicon Valley for, which is of course we're going to overdo it. Of course there are way too many companies being funded doing self-driving cars, but what always happens in the Valley, right? The great strength of the Valley, I would argue, is that when something starts to work, we overfund it. Like we have way too many companies going after this. Most of them don't work, but the ones that do end up becoming very big and important, right? And ultimately valuable. And so I think we'll get that exact same result out of this phenomenon. For people who want to say the Silicon Valley just does bubbles over and over again, there will be ammunition to support that view. But I think out of that will come, defining companies of the era that we probably haven't even heard of yet that are going to be on the scale of the big technology winners.
In that sector.
In that sector, yeah. The opportunities are very, very, very big.
Do you worry, either of you, about the job impact? When we're talking, and I want to understand where you look at where you feel the responsibility, if you have any, on the future of jobs. It's the thing I'm very interested in.
Well, and obviously, to some degree, what I founded LinkedIn was trying to help people figure out what the skills, jobs, opportunities of the future. So taking software and networks to enable that and enable people to be able to find the right opportunities, get the right skills, get the right connections to those kinds of things, that's actually very central. Let me give you a kind of a classic kind of thought within the autonomous vehicles, because people frequently say, oh, these autonomous vehicles are going to take a whole bunch of jobs. There's an issue there, and you have to get that transition. But on the other hand, once you have autonomous vehicles, for example, being able to have people now actually, in fact, be able to get to work in a much more easy way, to be able to actually, when they're in transit, to be actually doing things that are either relaxing or working as a way of doing it. It also opens up a variety of productivity possibilities.
No, I get that argument of like you can now text and drink. I get that. I get, it's all the
Well,
happy.
the drink is the fun thing, the texting.
Yeah, all right. But it is that happy, shiny future idea of like, oh, it's going to be so much, just same thing with AI, same thing with that. Mark, you were just going to say something, but what I wonder about is when that happens, there are millions of jobs. Take driving. Right. Millions of jobs. And I think when Travis was on this stage and said the problem is the guy, he actually was honest compared to most people, by saying the guy in the front seat's the problem. We need to get rid of the guy in the front seat. You know what I mean? Which everyone had a sharp intake of breath. I was like, yay, he said it. But how do you look at that? Do you feel, what are you going to do about that? Or do you have nothing to do about it?
So it's a fallacy. It's the lump of labor fallacy. It's the Luddite fallacy. It's recurring panic. This happens every 25, 50 years. People get all amped up about machines are going to take all the jobs, and it never happens. So let's talk about cars specifically, because that's front and center for the conversation. So when the automobile, 100 years ago, when the automobile went mainstream, this concern literally existed. Exact same panic happened. And it happened because of all the people whose livelihood literally was taking care of horses, right? So everybody running stables and everybody doing blacksmiths and like the whole thing. And oh my God, what's going to happen? Because Ford Motor Company is going to own the world and nobody else is going to have anything to do. The car then created not only a lot of jobs building cars, right? It became a huge employer. Right now, the car industry became such a huge employer that we had to bail out all the car companies to keep all the people working. Like in 100 years, it went entirely in the other direction. Not only that, the car, think of everything else that happened as a consequence of the car. So the idea of surface streets, right? Paved streets emerged because of the car, right? Streets weren't paved before the car. They were paved for the car. So paving streets, the idea of restaurants, the idea that you might actually go someplace to eat something was an invention of the car. The idea of motels, hotels, the place we're in here, exists entirely because of the automobile. The idea of movie theaters, the idea of apartment complexes, the idea of office complexes, the idea of suburbs, the entire build out of suburban America. The jobs that were created by the automobile on the second, third, and fourth order effects were 100x, 1,000x the number of jobs that blacksmiths had. And so this goes to kind of the fundamental kind of flaw in the logic, though they call it the lump of labor fallacy, which is technological change causes productivity growth. Productivity growth lets us produce more of what we can already make with less resources, and then lets us create, that's what frees up the spending power to let us create lots of new things, create lots of new demand, and that's what creates new industries, and that's what creates new jobs. And then 100 years later, we look back on it and we're like, I can't believe anybody was ever a blacksmith. And so this has been the panic, literally this is like the panic every 25, 50 years.
Except if you were a blacksmith.
And it never comes true. The good news is...
They didn't work out.
The good news is the car companies and all of these other industries hired huge numbers of people. And so I think the self-driving car has the opportunity to not only improve productivity for people in the car, which will be a huge economic boost for those people, not only has the opportunity to save lives, right? Over 1 million people die worldwide in road deaths today caused by human drivers, and I think we can take that very close to zero, right? Which is very good for both human welfare and in terms of economic productivity, right? It's a very serious dent in productivity when people get killed, and then all the ancillary industries that end up getting built out. So as an example, maybe this whole land use thing everybody's worried about, maybe with self-driving cars, we can start to have exurbs that actually work, which is to say another layer around cities, right, further out, right, that don't qualify as suburbs because you couldn't possibly tolerate commuting in an hour and a half. Right, so people in Silicon Valley are already experiencing, if you live south of San Jose, your commute now might be an hour and a half, but it's an hour and a half in the car, driving the car. If you were in the self-driving car, all of a sudden, then you might have a huge construction boom in all the outlying areas around these cities, and that construction boom might hire far more people than were ever involved in driving cars. And so the process works. By the way, as evidence of that, after all of the technological disruption that has everybody all freaked out that got us to where we are today, right? Unemployment in the U.S. is now below 4.3%.
Right, except if you're living in areas like Kentucky.
There's 6 million job openings in the U.S. and the panic stories in the press have gone overnight from oh my God, not enough jobs to oh my God, not enough workers, right? And the Times, as an example, Dean's paper had a very good story about 2 weeks ago on there's now a crisis in Utah. There aren't enough people to literally milk all the cows. They've literally run out of people to milk the cows. And so the jobs crisis we actually have in the U.S. today is we don't have enough workers.
Trained in the right things.
And by the way, we might make that, if these immigration policies continue, we might make that problem far worse.
Yeah. Well, okay, you're for immigration then.
Very much so.
Okay, good. What are you worried about? Are you worried about this at all? And then we're going to get to questions.
Well, so the one thing, I agree with most of what Mark said there, including the fact that if you remap what is the logistics in space, it creates a lot of different productivity, not just construction, but a lot of different ways that may play out and changes cost curves. I think the transitions can be very painful. So I think we need to pay attention to the pain, that pain. So like, for example, the agriculture to industrial revolution actually involved a lot.
Very ugly.
Very ugly. And so while I tend to think, oh, look, it works out, it'll probably work out anyway. The question is, let's try to make it work out in a way that's more humane, more, kind of the society that we want to be, and kind of not as much pain in that kind of transition.
Right, absolutely. Do you think about that pain?
So look, so let me ask.
Or are you just Blofeld, or what's going on?
Let me ask. So let's talk about what's actually happening. So these are all hypotheticals. Let's talk about what's actually happening. So economists have a way of measuring the rate of technological change, disruption in the economy. It's called productivity growth. Would we expect, based on everything that we read here and understand with this rate of technological change and disruption, would we think that productivity growth is at generational highs or lows?
Probably highs.
Right, and it turns out it's at generational lows. Productivity growth is running super low, and economists are writing books left, right, and center, agonizing over why productivity isn't growing faster. Would you expect that the rate of job churn, the rate of both job creation and destruction in the economy, which tend to go hand in hand, would you expect that the rate of churn is at a generational high or generational low?
No idea. I'm not going to answer.
It's a trick question, as you've now anticipated.
Everything's a trick question with you.
The rate of job churn in the American economy has been declining for 40 years and shows no sign of growing. Would you expect that the rate of which people are turning over in jobs, individuals turning over in jobs, is increasing or decreasing?
Well, millennials or who?
Everybody. Well, just everybody is the set. By the way, including millennials.
Probably are.
Decreasing.
All right.
People are staying in jobs longer. And would you expect, because of all the disruption that we know about, would you expect that the rate of new entrants of new companies into existing industries is accelerating or decelerating?
Go ahead.
It's decelerating.
Okay.
We don't have the problem.
This is Mark at 11 p.m. with me.
We don't have, I haven't even had a scotch yet.
Right.
That can be fixed.
That can be fixed. We do not only do we not have the problem everybody's worried about, we have the opposite problem. We don't have enough change. We don't have enough change. We don't have enough creation of new jobs. We don't have enough creation of new opportunity, which is what, in my view, goes right back to the politics, is what leads to zero-sum politics.
Right.
The reason our politics is going sideways is not because there's too much change, it's because there's not enough change. Mm-hmm. It's because people don't see a future because they don't see anything changing. And I think you see the zero-sum politics, you see that sense on both the left, right, on the Bernie left and on the Trump right. I think that's the problem. The way through that is not to slow down. The way through that is to speed up, right? The way through that is more change, more growth, more opportunity, right? That's the path forward. And so this goes back to, like, I'm very worried that we've actually gotten off and we're just talking about completely the wrong thing right now. And I'm hoping maybe over the next couple of years, we can massage this a little bit more towards the actual crisis that we have.
All right. Questions from the audience right here.
Hey, Guy Horowitz, T Capital. How are you? So this is a very Silicon Valley centric view, which is where you guys are. Is the world changing in that respect? Are we seeing more ideas and concepts coming from other parts of the world?
So I think the answer to your question in some degree is both, which is yes, there's more entrepreneurship, there's more technology, there's multiple areas, not just obviously a huge amount of stuff going on in China, but like when you get to Europe, it's Stockholm and Berlin and London. There's various cities across the U.S. On the other hand, frequently is Silicon Valley losing some of its edge?
Yeah, I think that's always the question.
And I actually think that Silicon Valley is persisting because of the network effect of Silicon Valley in terms of lots of entrepreneurs move here. The ideation moves at a very fast pace rate because people will talk to each other about what's going on, what are you seeing in autonomous vehicles, which things are going to work, et cetera, and that also creates something. So I think the answer is, to some degree, is yes to the rest of the world, but also continuing very interesting patterns of leadership from Silicon Valley.
Are you worried about Silicon Valley losing its step?
No.
Never.
Not right now.
Yeah.
Well, we're doing everything we can to kill it, but so far we keep missing.
All right.
Who's the we?
Collectively, the state of California.
Oh, okay.
The city of San Francisco.
All right, got it.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I'm going to make it even worse for you. Anyway.
Hello, Manny Kutiel.